Welcome. Let yourself settle in. Wherever you are right now, in bed, on a couch, somewhere quiet at the end of a long day, you don't need to do anything else tonight. You don't need to solve anything, plan anything, or figure anything out for the next 2 hours. All you need to do is listen, and let your mind slowly loosen its grip on the day behind you. Tonight, we're going to spend time with some of the oldest and steadiest wisdom human beings have ever put into words. The teachings of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, men who lived almost 2,000 years ago, and who thought deeply about how to face a difficult world with a calm and settled mind. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to take notes or hold on to anything tightly. Just let the words move through you. The way water moves over stone. Some of it will sink in. Some of it will simply pass by. Both are fine. There is something the Stoics understood that feels especially true at the end of a day. That peace is not something you chase or earn through more effort. It's something that becomes available the moment you stop gripping so tightly to everything you think you need to control. So as we begin, let your shoulders drop a little. Let your breathing slow down. Just slightly. There is nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing else you need to be doing. Just this. Just resting here, while some old and gentle wisdom washes over you. One thought at a time. Let's begin. There's a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with how much sleep you've had. It's the tiredness that comes from carrying things all day that were never meant to be carried so tightly. Worries about tomorrow, replays of conversations that already happened, small frustrations that built up, one on top of another, until by evening, you feel weighed down without quite knowing why. Marcus Aurelius understood this kind of weight better than almost anyone. He was the emperor of Rome, responsible for an empire, for wars, for decisions that affected millions of lives. And yet, in his private writings, the things he returned to again and again were not really about the empire at all. They were about the mind, about how to set down, at the end of each day, the things that didn't need to be carried any further. He wrote, quite simply, that we suffer more from our reaction to things than from the things themselves. Not that hardship isn't real, but that so much of what exhausts us is not the event itself. It's the story we keep telling ourselves about the event, long after it's already passed. Think, for a moment, about your own day. Somewhere in it, there was probably a moment that stuck with you. A comment someone made, a task that didn't go the way you wanted, a small worry about something that hasn't even happened yet. And notice, that moment is already over. Whatever happened, happened. It exists now only as a memory. A story you're still telling yourself. The event ended hours ago. But the weight of it, if you let it, can stay with you long into the night. The Stoics offered a simple, almost tender invitation here. At the end of each day, you get to set the story down. Not because the day didn't matter, but because carrying it any further doesn't serve you, it only tires you. Seneca wrote about this practice directly. Each evening, before sleep, he would quietly review his day, not to judge himself harshly, but simply to notice what went well, what he might do differently. And then, gently, he would let it rest. Tomorrow was a new day, with its own weather, its own conditions. Tonight didn't need to carry it. There's something worth trying here. If you're willing, as you lie here now, let your mind drift back over today, not to analyze it. Just to notice it, the moments that were hard, the moments that were good. And with each one you notice, imagine setting it down, like laying down a stone you've been holding in your hand all day. You don't have to fix anything tonight. You don't have to resolve anything. The philosopher's evening practice was never about self-improvement in the pushing, striving sense. It was about release, about ending each day lighter than you began it, whenever that's possible. Marcus Aurelius, writing to no one but himself, in the middle of wars and political struggles far greater than anything most of us will ever face, reminded himself of something worth holding on to tonight. That very little is needed to make a life peaceful. Not more accomplishments, not more certainty about tomorrow. Just the willingness, each night, to set down what doesn't need to be carried any further. So tonight, whatever you're holding, a worry, a frustration, an unfinished thought, see if you can imagine setting it down. Just for now, not gone forever, just set aside, resting somewhere outside of you, so that you can finally rest too. There will be time for all of it tomorrow. If it still needs your attention, tonight, it can simply wait. Let yourself become a little heavier into the bed beneath you. A little softer. A little further from the day. And a little closer to rest. There's a teaching from Epictetus that, once it settles into you, tends to change how heavy everything else feels. Epictetus was born into slavery. He owned almost nothing for most of his early life, not his body. Not his time, not even, in the eyes of the law, himself. And yet, somehow, he became one of the calmest and freest minds in all of ancient philosophy. How does someone with so little external freedom become so internally free? His answer was this: almost everything that troubles us falls into one of two categories. Things within our control, and things outside our control. And most human suffering, he taught, comes from confusing the two, from trying to control things that were never ours to control. And from neglecting the one thing that always is. Your thoughts are yours, your choices are yours, your effort, your attention, your responses, all yours. But other people's opinions of you, the outcome of your plans, what tomorrow brings, whether things go the way you hope, none of that is yours to hold on to. It was never yours to grip. Think, for a moment, about how much of today's tiredness came from things outside that second circle. A worry about what someone thought of you. A concern about an outcome you can't yet know. A tension about tomorrow, which hasn't even arrived yet, and which you cannot actually touch or shape from here. All of that energy, spent on things that were never within reach. Epictetus wasn't asking you to stop caring. He was asking you to notice where your energy actually belongs. Because the moment you stop wrestling with what isn't yours to hold, something in the body relaxes. Something in the mind loosens. There's simply less to fight. Imagine, for a moment, setting down every thought tonight that begins with what if. What if this happens? What if they think that? What if tomorrow goes wrong? Each one of those thoughts is reaching for something outside your hands, something you were never meant to hold in the first place. And in its place, imagine just this breath, this moment, this quiet, is yours, fully yours. Nothing needs to be solved here. Nothing needs to be gripped. There's a passage where Marcus Aurelius reminds himself that the things which most disturb us are rarely the events themselves, but our judgments about them. Take away the judgment, the story, the interpretation, the fear about what it means, and what's often left is far smaller. Far quieter than it seemed a moment ago. Tonight, if a worry rises, and it likely will, because minds are built to wander toward unfinished business, you don't need to fight it. Just notice it. Notice whether it belongs to the first circle, the things you can act on, or the second, the things you cannot touch from here. And if it belongs to the second circle, you can simply let it drift past, the way a cloud drifts past without needing to be caught. Epictetus taught his students a phrase to return to, again and again, whenever they felt overwhelmed. Not all of it is yours to carry. Only your judgments, your responses, your presence right now, that much is yours. The rest belongs to the world, to time, to tomorrow. Let that be true tonight. Let the parts of today that were never yours to hold slip quietly out of your hands. There is nothing more to do with them right now. There may never be anything more to do with some of them at all. What remains, this stillness, this breath, this moment of rest, that is yours completely. No one can take it. Nothing outside can disturb it, unless you hand it the power to. So let your hands, quite literally, go soft against the sheets. Let your jaw unclench, just slightly. Let the muscles around your eyes soften. Nothing needs your grip right now. Nothing at all. There is a particular kind of restlessness that comes, quietly, from feeling like something is still missing, even at the end of a full day, even after accomplishing things. Connecting with people, moving through your responsibilities, there can be this faint, persistent sense that it wasn't quite enough, that you should have done more, had more, been further along than you are. The Stoics had a great deal to say about this feeling, because it was as common in ancient Rome as it is now. Seneca, who was for a time one of the wealthiest men in the empire, wrote something that seems almost contradictory coming from someone with so much. He said that it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. Read slowly. That sentence rearranges something. Wealth, in the truest sense, was never about how much a person had. It was about the relationship between what they had and what they wanted. A person who wants very little, and has that little, is wealthy. A person who has enormous amounts, but wants endlessly more, will always, by definition, feel poor. Tonight, whatever your day contained, whether it felt full or lacking, productive or scattered, there is an invitation here to simply notice what's already present. Not to fix anything, not to plan how to get more of something tomorrow. Just to notice, gently, what's already here. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in the quiet hours, often returned to a simple practice of accounting for what he already possessed. Not achievements, not possessions, just the basic, quiet facts of being alive, a mind capable of thought, a body that had carried him through another day, people in his life who mattered to him, however imperfectly. He wrote that very little is needed to make a happy life, that it is all within. In one's way of thinking, not that circumstances don't matter, but that the felt experience of enough is far more available than most of us realize. If we're willing to actually look for it instead of constantly scanning for what's missing. Consider, for a moment, 3 things from today that you would genuinely miss if they disappeared. Not achievements, not future plans, just quiet, ordinary things, a conversation, a meal, a moment of ease somewhere in the middle of the day. They don't need to be remarkable. They only need to be real. That quiet exercise, noticing what's already here rather than what's still missing, was, for the Stoics, not a one-time realization but a nightly practice. Because the mind, left alone, tends to drift toward lack. It's built that way, but it can be gently redirected, each night, back toward what's actually present. Epictetus taught that wealth is not about great possessions but about having few wants. Tonight, you don't need more than what's already here. You don't need the day to have gone differently. You don't need tomorrow to be sorted out before you can rest. This moment, this stillness, this breath, this quiet is already enough. Not because nothing else matters. Not because ambition or growth stop mattering. But because right now, in this specific moment, there is nothing more required of you than to simply be here. Resting, complete as you are. Let that settle into the body for a moment. The sense that nothing else is owed. That this moment doesn't need anything added to it in order to be sufficient. Just this, enough, exactly as it is. There is a kind of noise that has nothing to do with sound. It's the noise of a mind that won't stop moving, jumping from one half-finished thought to another. Replaying moments, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet, circling back to old worries that have been circled 1,000 times before. Epictetus warned his students about this constant inner chatter, though he lived in a world with far less external noise than ours. He understood that the mind, left unchecked, will always find something to grasp at, some thought to chase, some worry to worry over, not because there's always something urgent, but because the mind mistakes movement for usefulness. Tonight, there's an invitation to notice this movement without needing to stop it forcefully. You don't need to fight your thoughts into silence. That rarely works, and it usually creates more noise, not less. Instead, there's a gentler practice the Stoics returned to again and again. Simply observing the mind's movement the way you might watch weather pass across a sky. Not chasing each thought, not resisting it either, just noticing it, and letting it continue on its way. Marcus Aurelius wrote about returning to the present moment as a kind of anchor, not because the present is always easy, but because it's the only place where the mind can actually rest. The past is a memory. The future is an idea. Only right now is real, tangible, available to settle into. If a thought arises tonight, a worry, a memory, a stray fragment of tomorrow's to-do list, you don't need to follow it all the way to its conclusion. You can simply notice, there's a thought, and then gently, without force, let your attention come back here, back to this breath, back to the weight of your body against whatever is holding you right now. Back to this quiet, unremarkable, sufficient moment. This isn't about achieving perfect stillness. The Stoics weren't interested in becoming blank or empty. They were interested in becoming steady, able to notice the mind's movement without being swept away by it every single time. Seneca compared an untrained mind to a runaway horse, pulling its rider wherever it wanted to go. But a mind that has practiced this gentle noticing, again and again, becomes less like a runaway horse and more like a calm one, still capable of movement, but no longer pulling you somewhere you didn't choose to go. Tonight, you don't need to control every thought that arises. You simply need to notice, gently, that you don't have to follow each one all the way to the end. Some thoughts, when noticed and softly released, simply dissolve on their own, the way morning fog dissolves once the sun rises just slightly. Let your breathing become a little slower now. Not forced, just naturally. Gradually slower, the way a body settles when it finally has permission to rest. Each breath in, each breath out, nothing to solve in between them. If your mind wanders, and it will, because that's simply what minds do, there's no need for frustration. Just notice, gently, and return. Notice, and return. This is the entire practice. Not perfection, just a soft, repeated return to this moment. Again and again, for as long as you need to. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from needing to defend yourself, from feeling, throughout the day, that you have to prove something, correct something, make sure someone understands your side of things. The Stoics had an unusual relationship with this impulse. Epictetus taught that much of our daily friction comes not from actual disagreement, but from an attachment to being seen as right, being understood correctly, having the last word. He suggested something that, on first hearing, can feel almost radical. That you don't always need to correct every misunderstanding. That some things can simply be let go, not because they don't matter, but because your peace matters more than winning a point that will be forgotten by tomorrow. Think about how much energy, across an ordinary day, goes into these small defenses. A comment that stung slightly, that you found yourself replaying, thinking of what you should have said instead, a misunderstanding you wanted to correct, even though the person's opinion, honestly, will have little bearing on your life a week from now. Marcus Aurelius, who dealt with far more serious disagreements than most of us ever will, political rivals, wartime decisions, the judgments of an empire, wrote to himself that the best revenge is to not be like the person who caused the offense. Not to win the argument, not to prove them wrong, simply to remain steady, and let their behavior be theirs, without needing your energy to respond to every part of it. Tonight, if there's a moment from today still sitting with you, a comment, a disagreement, a misunderstanding you wish had gone differently, there's an invitation to simply let it be unfinished. Not resolved, not corrected, just unfinished, and allowed to stay that way until tomorrow, or perhaps forever. Seneca wrote that a great mind, a genuinely settled mind, takes no notice of many things that would upset a smaller one. Not out of arrogance, but because a settled mind has learned which battles are actually worth its energy, and which ones simply aren't. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've noticed that caring and needing to win are two very different things. You can care about a relationship without needing every exchange within it to end in your favor. You can care about your work without needing every piece of feedback to be resolved to your satisfaction before you can rest. Tonight, whatever went unresolved today, you're allowed to leave it unresolved. The Stoics understood that peace often requires this small, quiet surrender, not because you're weak, but because you've recognized that your rest tonight matters more than winning an argument that, by tomorrow, will already feel smaller than it does right now. Let your hands soften again. Let whatever you were holding onto, a point you wanted to make, a misunderstanding you wanted fixed, rest for now. Outside of your grip, it will still be there tomorrow. If it still matters, tonight, it can simply wait. You don't need to be right about anything right now. You only need to rest. Marcus Aurelius began his most personal writings, the private journal we now know as Meditations, not with philosophy, not with strategy, not with the burdens of running an empire. He began with people. He wrote about his grandfather's gentleness, his mother's simplicity and generosity, the various teachers and friends who had shaped him, each in some specific, quiet way. It's a strikingly tender way to begin a book that history remembers as one of the most rigorous works of philosophy ever written. But it makes sense, once you sit with it, because so much of what settles us, at the end of a long day, isn't really about ideas at all. It's about people, the ones who showed us something about how to be, simply by being who they were. Tonight, there's an invitation to do something similar, not analyzing, not evaluating, just remembering. Think of someone in your life, past or present, who showed you something about steadiness, about kindness, about how to move through the world a little more gently. Maybe it's someone from years ago. Maybe it's someone you saw just today. It doesn't need to be a grand memory. Sometimes it's the smallest moments that stay with us the longest, a particular kind of patience someone showed you once, a piece of advice offered gently, without judgment, at exactly the moment you needed it. Marcus Aurelius understood that we are, in many ways, made up of the people who shaped us. Not just their advice, but their presence, the way they moved through hardship, the way they treated others when no one was watching. Tonight, let yourself rest in that thought for a while, not analyzing what it means, not trying to extract a lesson from it, just letting the memory of that person, or those people, sit with you gently, like a quiet form of company as you drift towards sleep. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius often, and in one letter. He reflected on how the presence of a genuinely good person, even from a distance, even in memory, has a steadying effect. He suggested imagining someone you deeply respect watching your actions, not as judgment, but as a way of holding yourself to the quiet standard that person represents. Tonight, you don't need to hold yourself to anything. You simply get to rest in the presence, even if only in memory, of someone who showed you something good. Let their steadiness become, for tonight, a small part of your own. And if such a person doesn't immediately come to mind, that's all right too. Sometimes it's not one person, but a collection of small moments, a stranger's unexpected kindness, a friend's patience during a hard season, a quiet act of generosity you witnessed once and never forgot. Let all of that settle into you now, not analyzed, not turned into a lesson, just felt, quietly, as a kind of company in the dark. We are, in the end, deeply shaped by who we've been near, and there is something worth resting in, the knowledge that somewhere in your life, someone showed you what steadiness looks like, and that steadiness, even now, is available to you, not because you had to earn it tonight, simply because it was given to you once, and it remains yours to carry forward, gently, whenever you need it. Let your breathing settle a little further now. Let the memory of that person, or those people, stay with you like a quiet, steady presence in the room. Nothing more needs to happen right now. Just this, just resting, held a little by the memory of goodness you've witnessed somewhere along the way. There's a particular kind of worry that visits most persistently right before sleep, the worry about tomorrow. The things still unresolved, the conversation you'll need to have, the task still waiting, the uncertainty about how something will unfold. The Stoics were remarkably clear-eyed about this kind of anticipatory worry, because they recognized something simple but easy to forget. Tomorrow does not need your attention tonight. It will arrive with its own time, its own resources, its own version of you who has rested and is more capable of meeting it than the tired version of you lying here right now. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Most of what we worry about, when it actually arrives, turns out to be more manageable than the version we rehearsed in our minds beforehand. The rehearsal itself, the anticipation, the imagined conversations, the worst-case scenarios, often causes more suffering than the actual event ever will. Tonight, if your mind reaches toward tomorrow, and it likely will, because that's simply what minds do in the quiet hours, there's an invitation to gently notice this reaching. And just as gently, decline to follow it all the way through. Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because tonight is not the time tomorrow needs from you. Tonight, what tomorrow actually needs is for you to rest, so that whatever version of you arrives to meet it is steady, clear, and capable. Marcus Aurelius, as emperor, faced tomorrows filled with genuine uncertainty, wars, political instability, decisions that would affect thousands of lives. And still, his private writings return again and again to this same simple discipline. Handle today's portion today. Let tomorrow bring its own portion, and trust that you will be equipped to handle it when it actually arrives. Not before. There is a kind of trust being asked for here, not blind optimism. Not pretending problems don't exist, but a quieter trust in your own capacity to meet things as they come, rather than trying to meet them all in advance, in the dark, exhausted, before they've even arrived. Tonight, if a worry about tomorrow rises, you might try saying to yourself, gently, this can wait. Not dismissively, just honestly. There is nothing that needs solving about tomorrow at this exact moment. The solving, if any is needed, happens tomorrow, with tomorrow's mind, tomorrow's information, tomorrow's resources. Right now, there is only the rest that prepares you for it. Epictetus taught that some things are within our power, and some are not, and the timing of tomorrow's events, the way they unfold, is simply not something available to you right now. In the dark, half awake, what is available to you right now is this: rest. Simple, quiet, restorative rest, which is, in its own way, one of the most useful things you can offer to tomorrow's version of yourself. So let tomorrow wait, let it arrive when it arrives, with its own light, its own morning, its own set of possibilities. Right now, there is only this, the quiet, the stillness, the slow settling of a mind that has decided, at least for tonight, to stop reaching forward and simply rest here, in the only moment that's actually available, this one. Let your breathing continue its slow, natural rhythm. Nothing about tomorrow needs you right now. Only this moment does. And this moment asks so little of you, only that you rest. There's a particular kind of tension that comes from wishing things had gone differently, a conversation that didn't unfold the way you hoped, a decision that, looking back, you might have made differently, a day that simply didn't match what you'd imagined for it. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that, at first, can sound almost stark. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, doing so with all your heart. It's worth sitting with that word, accept. Not because everything that happens is good, not because acceptance means approval, but because so much suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our resistance to them, the part of us that keeps insisting, quietly or loudly, that things should have gone differently than they did. Tonight, if there's something from today, or from longer ago, that you find yourself wishing had unfolded differently, there's an invitation here to simply notice that wish, and then, gently, set it down, not because the wish is wrong, but because holding onto it any tighter tonight won't change what already happened. It will only keep you awake, replaying something that has already, quietly, become the past. Epictetus taught that events themselves are neutral. It is our judgment about them that creates suffering or peace. This isn't about pretending difficult things are actually fine. It's about noticing the difference between what happened and the story we continue telling about what happened, long after the event itself has ended. Seneca wrote to a grieving friend once, offering something gentler than most advice about hardship. He didn't tell her to stop feeling. He told her that time and acceptance, together, do more healing than resistance ever could. That fighting against what has already happened only prolongs the very pain we're trying to escape. Tonight, whatever you're holding, a regret, a wish that things had gone differently, a small ache about something unresolved, there's room here to simply let it be what it is. Not fixed, not resolved, just accepted, quietly, as something that happened, and that doesn't require your resistance any longer tonight. This isn't giving up. The Stoics were not passive people, they acted, fully and completely, wherever action was possible, but they also understood something important. There is a point where action isn't possible anymore, where the moment has already passed, and where the only thing left to do is accept it, so that you can rest, and so that tomorrow can begin from a place of quiet rather than continued resistance. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea often, that the universe, or fate, or simply the unfolding of events, moves in its own way, and that fighting against its natural movement only exhausts us further. There is a kind of relief available in finally letting something be what it already is. Tonight, let that relief settle in, even just a little. Whatever happened today that you wish had gone differently, let it rest now, exactly as it is, not because it was perfect, because resisting it any further tonight will only keep you from the rest you actually need. Let your body soften into this acceptance. Let your breathing slow even further. Whatever the day held, it has already become the past. And the past, however imperfect, doesn't need your resistance anymore. It only needs to be set down, gently, so that you can finally, fully rest. There's a quiet exhaustion that comes from constantly measuring yourself against other people, against some imagined version of who you should be by now, against expectations you may not have even chosen for yourself. The Stoics offered something different, not a lowering of standards, but a shift in where those standards actually come from. Epictetus taught that comparing yourself to others is one of the surest ways to feel perpetually behind, because there will always be someone further along on whatever path you're measuring yourself against. He suggested, instead, measuring yourself only against who you were yesterday, not who anyone else is. Not some external image of success or worth. Just you, today, compared honestly to you, yesterday. Tonight, consider setting down any comparison you've been quietly carrying to a sibling, a colleague, a stranger online, an imagined version of a more accomplished version of yourself. None of those comparisons are actually necessary for you to rest well tonight. They were never necessary for your worth in the first place. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling the largest empire in the known world, wrote to himself with remarkable humility about simply doing his best with what was in front of him each day, not measuring himself against some impossible standard, but against the simple question of whether he had acted with reason and integrity, given the circumstances he actually faced. This is a gentler standard than most of us hold ourselves to. Not perfection, not comparison to others, just honest effort, given what was actually possible today. Tonight, if you find yourself running through the day's shortcomings, the things you didn't get to, the ways you fell short of some imagined ideal, there's an invitation to gently set that measuring stick down. You don't need it tonight. You did what you could, with the resources, energy, and circumstances you actually had today. That's enough. It was always enough. Seneca wrote that nature has given us enough for a good life, if we know how to manage what we have rather than constantly reaching for more. The same is true of ourselves. We are given, each day, enough capacity to meet what's actually in front of us, even if it doesn't always feel that way in the moment. Tonight, you are enough, exactly as you are, having lived exactly the day you lived, with exactly the energy and resources you had access to. Nothing more was required of you than what you actually gave. And whatever gap you feel between where you are and where you think you should be, that gap can rest tonight too. It doesn't need solving before you're allowed to sleep. Let yourself settle into this quiet, unremarkable truth. You did enough today. Not perfectly, not exceptionally, just enough, given everything that was actually in front of you. And that's all that was ever being asked of you. Let your body rest more fully into wherever you're lying. Let the comparisons, the measuring, the quiet sense of not quite enough dissolve. At least for tonight, there will be time, if you want it, to reach for more tomorrow. Right now, there is only this, a quiet acknowledgement that you, exactly as you are, having lived exactly the day you lived, are enough. Marcus Aurelius often compared the mind to a great rock standing at the edge of the sea. Waves come, again and again, sometimes gently, sometimes with great force, and the rock, unmoved, lets the waves break against it, again and again, while the sea eventually grows calm around it. He wasn't describing indifference. He was describing steadiness, the capacity to remain grounded even while difficulty moves around you, without needing every wave to stop before you can find your footing. Tonight, whatever waves moved through your day, small frustrations, larger worries, moments of genuine difficulty, there's an invitation to imagine yourself, just for these next few minutes, as that same steady rock, not unaffected, not pretending the waves don't exist, simply grounded enough that they can move past you, around you, without carrying you away with them. This steadiness isn't something you're born with fully formed. It's something practiced, again and again, each time you choose to stay grounded rather than swept away by whatever difficulty presents itself. And each night, as you rest, you're offering yourself another quiet rehearsal of that same steadiness, a chance to let the day's waves move past, while you remain unmoved, resting exactly where you are. Epictetus taught his students that external events are like the waves, they come and go, largely outside our control, but our response, our inner steadiness, is like the rock itself, something we build, strengthen, and return to, again and again, regardless of what the sea brings that day. Tonight, let yourself feel that steadiness, even if only in this quiet, temporary way. Whatever moved through your day, let it be the wave, and let you, resting here now, be the rock beneath it, unmoved, grounded, simply present, while the water continues its endless motion around you, eventually growing calm, the way it always does, given enough time. Seneca wrote that difficulties strengthen the mind, the way labor strengthens the body. Not that difficulty is enjoyable, or even always fair, but that each time we remain steady through something hard, we build a little more of that same steadiness for the next wave that comes. You've already done that today, more than you probably realize. Whatever moved through your day, you're still here, still resting, still breathing steadily in this quiet moment. That, in itself, is evidence of a kind of strength you may not always give yourself credit for. Let that steadiness settle into your body now. Let your breathing become the physical expression of that same rock, like calm, steady, unhurried, present regardless of what today held or what tomorrow might bring. The waves will keep coming, as they always do. That's simply what life is. But you don't need to be carried away by each one. You can be the steady ground beneath them, resting here now, unmoved, breathing slowly, letting the sea continue its motion around you while you remain exactly where you are, grounded, steady, at rest. There is something quietly sacred about the transition from day into night, a threshold the Stoics thought about often. Not with any particular ceremony, but with a simple recognition that endings deserve attention, just as much as beginnings do. Seneca described a nightly practice he maintained, of reviewing the day gently before sleep, not with harsh self-judgment, but with the same tenderness you might offer a friend recounting their day to you. What went well? What was difficult? What might be done differently if a similar situation arose again? This wasn't about self-criticism. It was about closure, a way of letting the day actually end, rather than carrying its unfinished business forward into sleep, where it would only continue circling, unresolved, disturbing the rest you actually need. Tonight, if you haven't already, there's an invitation to let today actually end, not by solving everything that happened in it, simply by acknowledging that it happened, that you moved through it as best you could, and that it's now, gently, becoming the past. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the discipline of living fully within the present portion of time available to you, not the whole of your life at once. Not every future possibility, just this specific day, this specific portion, which is now nearly complete. There is relief available in that recognition. Today doesn't need anything more from you. It has already given what it was going to give, held what it was going to hold. What remains now is simply rest, the quiet, necessary rest that allows tomorrow to begin freshly, unburdened by today's unfinished business. Epictetus taught that we are not troubled by events, but by our opinions about them. And one of the kindest opinions we can offer ourselves at the end of a long day is simply this: it's over now. Whatever it held, it's complete. There is nothing more required of you tonight except to rest. Let yourself feel that completion now. The day is ending, the way all days eventually do. Whatever it contained, difficulty, small joys, ordinary moments, unresolved concerns, it is, at this point, essentially finished. Nothing more will be added to it. It simply is what it was. And you get to rest now, in the quiet space between what today was and what tomorrow might become. This space doesn't require anything of you. It only asks that you allow yourself to be here, held by the stillness of a day that has already done all it was going to do. Seneca wrote of evening as a kind of quiet accounting, not to punish yourself for what went wrong, but to release the day fully, so that sleep can do what sleep is meant to do: restore you, prepare you, return you to yourself, ready for whatever tomorrow actually brings. Let this evening do that work now. Let today rest, complete, behind you. Let your body sink further into wherever you're resting, further released from the weight of a day that has, quite simply, already ended. There is nothing more it needs from you. There is nothing more you need to give it. Just this, quiet, complete rest, as one day gently closes and another, eventually, will just as gently begin. There is a particular kind of relief that comes from remembering how simple things actually are, beneath all the complexity we add to them. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire filled with intricate political struggles, military campaigns, and endless decisions, often returned, in his private writing, to remarkably simple ideas, that very little is actually needed for a peaceful life, that most of what disturbs us is not the world itself, but the elaborate stories we construct about it. Tonight, there's an invitation to notice how much complexity your mind may have added to an otherwise simple day. A conversation that was, in reality, just two people talking, became, in your mind, an entire narrative about what it meant, what it revealed, what should be done about it. A minor setback became, somewhere along the way, evidence of some larger pattern or problem. The Stoics were skilled at stripping situations back down to their simplest form. Epictetus taught that if you remove your judgment about an event, the story, the meaning you've attached to it, the elaborate interpretation, often what's left is far smaller and far more manageable than it first appeared. Consider, for a moment, whatever felt most complicated about today. Now imagine setting aside the story you've built around it, the meaning, the implications, the narrative about what it says about you or your life. What remains? underneath all of that, is often surprisingly simple. Something happened. You responded as best you could. The day continued. Seneca wrote about the burden of constantly overthinking, of adding layers of interpretation to events that, left alone, would simply pass by without much weight at all. He suggested that much of our suffering comes not from life itself, but from our habit of making everything more complicated than it needs to be. Tonight, let things be simple again. Whatever happened today, let it be just what it was, without the extra layers, without the elaborate meaning-making, without the complicated story your mind may have built around it throughout the day. This isn't about denying complexity where it genuinely exists. Some things are, in fact, complicated, but so much of what weighs on us is complexity we've added ourselves, unnecessary, exhausting, and, upon closer examination, not actually necessary to carry into sleep. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we have the power to strip away much of what troubles us simply by asking, honestly, whether it is truly as serious as it feels, or whether we've added weight to it that doesn't actually belong there. Tonight, let yourself strip a few things back down to their simplest form. The conversation that felt loaded, maybe it was just two people talking. The mistake that felt significant, maybe it was just an ordinary, forgettable moment that will matter far less by next week than it does right now. The worry that felt urgent, maybe, underneath the urgency, it's actually something that can simply wait. Let this simplicity settle into your body now. Let your breathing become simple too, not analyzed, not monitored, just naturally, quietly happening, the way breath always has, without needing your effort or attention. There is a kind of rest available in simplicity that complexity never offers. Tonight, let things be as simple as they actually are, underneath all the layers your mind may have added throughout the day. Just this breath, just this stillness, just this quiet, uncomplicated moment of rest. The Stoics believed in something they called the logos, a kind of rational order underlying the universe, connecting all things, moving all things towards some larger coherence. Even when individual events seemed chaotic or difficult to understand, you don't need to believe in any particular philosophy or cosmology to find something comforting in this idea tonight. There is a kind of relief available simply in recognizing that you are part of something much larger than today's individual concerns. A longer unfolding of time, of history, of countless lives that came before yours and countless more that will come after. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself of the vastness of time, how brief any single concern is, set against the enormous span of history. How quickly today's urgent matters will fade into insignificance, the way countless urgent matters before them already have. Tonight, whatever felt large or urgent today, there's an invitation to set it against that same vastness, not to diminish its importance entirely, but to notice how it fits into something much bigger than this single day, this single moment of worry. You are one small part of an enormous unfolding, one life among billions, one day among countless days, one moment within the vast span of time that stretches both before and after you. There is something quietly comforting in that smallness. Rather than something diminishing, it means you don't have to carry everything alone. You are held, in a sense, by something far larger than your individual concerns. Epictetus taught that understanding our place within the larger order of things helps loosen our grip on individual outcomes, individual worries, individual moments of difficulty, not because they don't matter, but because they exist within something so much larger than themselves. Tonight, let yourself feel held by that larger order, whatever you understand it to be. The natural rhythm of day following night, season following season, life continuing its ancient, steady rhythm regardless of today's individual concerns. You are part of that rhythm too. Your rest tonight is part of it. Your breathing, slow and steady, is part of something that has been happening in living things for as long as living things have existed. Seneca wrote about finding comfort in the constancy of nature, in the reliability of the sun rising, the seasons turning, the fundamental order that persists regardless of individual human worries. There is something steady there, something you can rest against tonight, larger than any single concern from today. Let yourself feel small in the good way now, not insignificant, but held, part of something vast and steady and ancient, which continues regardless of tonight's individual thoughts, tomorrow's individual concerns. You don't have to hold everything up yourself. You are held, in this moment, by by something far larger than your individual effort. Let your breathing settle into that same ancient rhythm, the rhythm that connects you to every living thing that has ever rested. Every mind that has ever quieted at the end of a long day. Every person who has ever looked at the vastness of time and felt, for a moment, both small and completely held. There is a kind of stillness that isn't the absence of thought, but the presence of enough space around each thought that it no longer feels urgent. No longer feels like it needs to be solved right now. The Stoics practiced returning to this stillness deliberately, not because thoughts are bad, but because a mind that never rests, that never has space between one thought and the next, eventually loses its capacity for clarity altogether. Marcus Aurelius wrote about retreating into himself, into a kind of inner quiet, whenever the external world became too loud, too demanding, too full of urgent-seeming concerns. He didn't have the luxury of physically leaving his responsibilities. An empire doesn't pause for its emperor's need for rest. But he found that this inner retreat was always available, regardless of external circumstances. Tonight, that same inner retreat is available to you, not by escaping anything, not by needing circumstances to be different than they are, but simply by turning inward, gently, toward the quiet that's always there, underneath the day's noise. This stillness doesn't require the absence of thoughts. Thoughts will continue to arise, that's simply what minds do, even in the quietest moments. But stillness means there's enough space around each thought that it doesn't have to be chased. Doesn't have to be resolved right now. Doesn't have to disturb the underlying quiet that remains available regardless of what passes through the surface of the mind. Epictetus taught that this inner stillness is one of the few things entirely within our control, not the external circumstances of our day. Not other people's actions, not the outcomes we hope for, but this quiet, internal space, available to us regardless of what else is happening around us. Tonight, let yourself return to that stillness now, not forcing thoughts away, simply allowing enough space around them that they lose their grip, lose their urgency, become simply thoughts passing through a mind that has decided, at least for tonight, to remain quiet and steady beneath them. Seneca described this inner quiet as a kind of retreat available at any moment. Regardless of external circumstances, a place within yourself that remains calm and steady, even when the external world is anything but. Let your breathing become an anchor into that stillness now. Each breath in, a small return to this quiet, steady space. Each breath out, a small release of whatever noise the day may have added. In, and steady, out, and released. Again and again, each breath a small, gentle return to the stillness that has been available to you this entire time. Underneath everything else, there is nothing to solve here. In this stillness, nothing to figure out, just this quiet, steady space, available to you regardless of what today held or what tomorrow might bring. Let yourself rest here now, in this quiet, for as long as you need to. There is a particular kind of gratitude that doesn't require effort, not the kind you have to work yourself into, but the kind that simply arises when you stop scanning for what's missing and instead let yourself notice what's already here. Marcus Aurelius began each day, according to his own writings, with a simple reminder to himself of what he had to be grateful for, not achievements, not possessions, but simple things, the capacity to think clearly, people in his life who had shaped him well, the basic, quiet fact of being alive for another day. Tonight, at the end of the day rather than the beginning, there's an invitation to do something similar. Not effortful gratitude, not forcing yourself to feel thankful for things you don't actually feel thankful for. Just a gentle noticing of what's already here, without needing to add anything to it. The warmth of wherever you're resting right now. The simple fact of having made it through another day, with whatever it held. The people, even if only a few, who make your life feel less alone. The quiet capacity to notice all of this, to reflect, to rest, itself a kind of gift. One that not every living thing has access to in quite the same way. Seneca wrote about the practice of noticing small, ordinary gifts throughout the day, not grand or remarkable things. Just simple, quiet moments that, when noticed, add up to something that feels, cumulatively, like a genuinely good life, even amid its difficulties. Tonight, let yourself notice a few of those small, ordinary gifts from today, not remarkable ones, just ordinary. A moment of ease somewhere in the day, a small kindness, given or received, the simple comfort of wherever you're resting right now, at the end of it all. Epictetus taught that gratitude and complaint cannot fully coexist in the same moment, that when we're genuinely noticing what's good, what's already here, the complaints, the sense of lack, naturally quiet down, at least for a little while. Let that quieting happen now. Let whatever complaints or worries were present earlier simply soften. As you notice, gently, what's actually here right now. Warmth, stillness, the simple fact of being alive, resting, breathing, at the end of another day that has, in its own imperfect way, already given you everything it was going to give. This gratitude doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need grand realizations or profound insights. It can be as simple as noticing that you're comfortable right now, that the day is over, that tomorrow remains an open possibility rather than a burden you need to carry tonight. Let this quiet gratitude settle into your body now, the way warmth settles into cold hands held near a fire. Nothing forced, just a gentle noticing of what's already good, already here, already enough, without needing anything added to it. Rest here now, in this quiet, ordinary gratitude. There is nothing more required of you tonight than this, simple noticing. Simple rest, simple stillness at the end of a day that, in its own way, has already given you enough. There is a particular kind of confidence the Stoics wrote about often, not confidence that everything will go exactly as planned, but confidence in your own capacity to meet whatever comes, regardless of how it unfolds. Marcus Aurelius faced genuine uncertainty throughout his life, wars with unpredictable outcomes, political instability, a plague that swept through his empire without warning. And yet, his writings reflect a steady, quiet confidence, not that things would go well, but that he would be capable of meeting them, whatever form they took. This is a different kind of confidence than the one most of us reach for, not certainty about outcomes, but trust in our own resilience, our own capacity to adapt, to respond, to find our footing even when circumstances are difficult or unexpected. Tonight, whatever uncertainty tomorrow holds, there's an invitation to rest in this quieter, steadier kind of confidence, not knowing exactly how things will unfold, but trusting, gently, that you have met difficult days before, and that you carry within you the same capacity to meet whatever tomorrow brings, however it arrives. Epictetus taught that we are stronger than we typically give ourselves credit for, that the challenges we've already survived are evidence of a resilience that remains available to us, even when we've momentarily forgotten it's there. Consider, for a moment, difficult days you've already moved through in your life, days that, at the time, felt overwhelming or uncertain, and notice, you're here now, resting, having made it through each of them, one way or another. That's not a small thing. That's evidence of a capacity that remains with you still, regardless of what tomorrow holds. Seneca wrote that we suffer more from anticipation than from reality, and that this anticipatory suffering often erodes a confidence that would otherwise be perfectly intact if we simply waited to meet things as they actually arrived, rather than pre-living every difficult possibility in advance. Tonight, let yourself set down the pre-living of tomorrow's possible difficulties. You don't need to solve them now, in advance, exhausted, before they've even arrived. You'll meet them, if they come, with whatever tomorrow's version of you has access to, rested, clearer, more capable than the tired version of you lying here right now. This is not blind optimism. It's simply trust, earned through every difficult day you've already survived, that you carry within you enough resilience to meet whatever comes next, even if you can't yet know exactly what that will be. Let that quiet confidence settle into you now, not certainty about outcomes, just trust in your own steady, ongoing capacity to meet things as they arrive, the way you always have, one way or another, through every difficult day that came before this one. Tomorrow will bring what it brings, and you will meet it, as you always have, with whatever capacity you actually have access to in that moment, which, history suggests, has always been enough, even when it didn't feel that way in advance. Rest in that quiet confidence now. There is nothing to solve about tomorrow tonight, only trust, gentle and steady, that you will be equipped to meet it, whatever it brings, the same way you've met every difficult day that came before. We're nearing the end of our time together tonight, and there's one final thing worth sitting with, gently, before we close. The Stoics believed that each day was, in its own small way, a complete life, a beginning, a middle, an end. Marcus Aurelius wrote about living each day as though it were in some sense, whole in itself, not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because this practice of completeness helps release the day fully, rather than carrying its unfinished threads forward indefinitely. Tonight, as this day comes to its close, there's an invitation to let it be complete. Not perfect, not fully resolved in every detail, but complete, in the sense that it has given what it was going to give, held what it was going to hold, and now, gently, is closing, the way all days eventually do. You don't need to carry it forward. You don't need to keep replaying it, analyzing it, wishing parts of it had gone differently. It can simply rest now, complete, behind you. One day among the many you've already lived, each one, in its own way, whole. Seneca wrote that the wise person goes to sleep each night as though it might be their last, not with fear, but with a kind of gentle completeness, a willingness to let each day be enough, exactly as it was, without needing anything more added to it. This isn't a morbid thought. It's actually a deeply peaceful one. It means you don't need tomorrow to fix today. Today already did what it was going to do. And tomorrow, if it comes, will be its own complete day, with its own beginning, middle, and end. Epictetus taught that death and endings are simply part of nature's larger rhythm, not something to fear, but something to accept as part of the same order that brings each day to its close, each season to its turn, each life, eventually, to its own natural completion. Tonight, let this day complete itself gently. Let it close, the way it's meant to close, without needing anything more from you. You did what you could with it. It gave what it was going to give. And now, it rests, complete, behind you. Marcus Aurelius, near the end of his own writings, returned often to a simple, steady acceptance that life, in all its complexity, ultimately asks only that we meet each moment as fully and as calmly as we can, and then release it, so that the next moment, whatever it holds, can be met freshly, without the weight of everything that came before. Let yourself release fully now. Let today complete itself, exactly as it was. Let your body sink more deeply into rest, more deeply into stillness, more deeply into the quiet that has been available to you this entire time. Underneath everything else, there is nothing more required of you tonight. You've done what today asked of you. Now, simply rest. Let sleep come, gently, in its own time, the way it always does. When we finally stop holding on so tightly and allow ourselves to simply be held instead. If you're still here, still listening, let yourself settle even further now into wherever you're resting. There's nothing more to think about tonight. Nothing more to solve, resolve, or figure out. The wisdom we've spent this time with, from Marcus Aurelius, from Seneca, from Epictetus, was never meant to be memorized or gripped tightly. It was only meant to be a companion for these quiet hours. Something steady to rest alongside as the day finally, gently, comes to its close. Whatever you carried into tonight, you can set it down now. Whatever tomorrow holds, it will wait for you, patiently, until you're ready to meet it, rested and clear. For now, there is only this stillness, this breath, slow and steady, this quiet permission to simply rest, exactly as you are, needing nothing more than what this moment already offers. If this brought you some peace tonight, know that there will be more like it, more evenings, more quiet wisdom, more space to simply rest here, together, at the end of long days. Sleep well. Let tomorrow come in its own time. Tonight, there is only rest.